W.F. Pendleton's Diary of the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1 to 3, 1863. I had picked up a small tin bucket before the Battle of Salem Church and carried it through the battle, all the way to Gettysburg, throughout that battle and a little while after it. We marched to Gettysburg through Culpeper County and over the Blue Ridge. While there, we halted about a day, during which we had hard rain. The next day, the Shenandoah River at the foot of the mountain was flooded, up to the armpits of the men. 4 men had to go together. I was the end one of 4 and hung on to a big fat man. We went about a mile further and camped for the night. We were given 3 days' rations. From there, we marched toward Berryville. Before we got to the Potomac River, we camped and were given orders from Lee that we were going into enemy country and that we were to respect private property. Next day, we crossed the river at Williamsport, and then we camped. Rations of whiskey were issued, as the men were wet. The whiskey was so strong that the men got happy and jolly. I didn't take any, but I was jolly too. The next day, we marched through Hagerstown, Maryland. Here, a little girl ran up and said, "I want a rebel button." One of the men gave me a wooden one to give her. We marched on through Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, camped there all day, and then moved east through Fayetteville and camped at the foot of the Blue Ridge. I wondered what was going on. We ate a lot of cherries near the camp. In the afternoon, we marched on and crossed the Blue Ridge at night. We didn't go where the Yankees were, but I met a cavalryman who said, "They're running like hell the last time I saw them." This was the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. We continued our march and reached the battlefield at night and camped nearby with Longstreet's corps. The next morning, we began the march toward the front and saw the enemy from a hill. About 4 in the afternoon, we formed in line of battle behind a stone fence which was behind a hill. I knew the battle was imminent. Colonel Kearse addressed each company, telling the men to fight and win. Soon, the firing from my brigade began, which was answered. Before our canteens were filled, the man that took them did not get back in time, and we were ordered to advance. We moved forward over a hill into an open field where we were under fire. We came to a road with high fences on both sides. The firing was getting hotter. I wondered if I would ever get across the fences. We were going toward a peach orchard, but were ordered to a right oblique. The firing was very heavy and dangerous. Colonel Kearse and Sergeant Hersey were killed. I didn't know it at the time, but both were killed dead. We went down toward a wood and through it, and the men in front retreated, and finally our men gave way about 200 yards. We passed a stream which was bloody from the wounded men. I drank from there. The men rallied in a lane. I called them, "Let's show we can fight in Pennsylvania as well as in Virginia." When the regiment rallied, Major McGlashan started right for the enemy, but they had retreated. We were now in a thick wood and attacked with Hood's Texas Division. We came up on them, following up the enemy. An officer came up who had lost his command, Lieutenant W.A. Tennille of the 15th Georgia. We got to the edge of the wood. To the right, in front, were Hood's men. I was behind a fence in the woods. A mile beyond, where the enemy had retreated, we reached the top of the hill. At sunset, an officer came up to Major McGlashan and asked him for reinforcements. I was sent over in charge of B, C, and H companies and stayed there for a while. The firing stopped after dark. The officer had seemed familiar to me, and I found out he was the brother of a cadet at Marietta, Frank Fontaine. It was a moonlit night. When I went back to my own regiment, the dead and wounded were lying all around, many crying for water. Sergeant Bailey gave some to a Union soldier who assaulted him with his fists. About 10 o'clock, I heard a voice asking what regiment we were. It was Lieutenant Colonel Fleming, who had not been in the battle. He had orders to bring the regiment back to the brigade near the spring. We started back. I walked with Fleming and asked him about Colonel Kearse. Captain Bedford of our company had been shot through the ankle. Captain Ford of Company A had been killed dead. I said, "Colonel, will this war never end?" I was very sad about my dead friends. We got back to the farmhouse, where we lay all night in line of battle. This was the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg. The next day, we gathered up the dead and buried them. I found a blanket on the field, and we buried Colonel Kearse in it. I covered his face with an old shirt. During the burial, I heard the battery start firing, so I went back to position after marking Kearse's grave. There were 3 batteries on the left, right, and behind us, and the enemy's battery in front. This battle was the greatest artillery battle the world had known. Lee's men charged, but were repulsed. I didn't know the result at the time. That afternoon, the 3rd of July, we went back to the stone fence on a hill. We stayed there the rest of the day. The next day, July 4th, it rained all day, and we were not under fire. Lee waited for an attack, but Meade didn't make one, so Lee began to retreat that night. We marched all night, back across the Blue Ridge towards Hagerstown, Maryland, along the same road we had come, marching very slowly. The roads were very muddy, and we went only about 10 miles. The next morning, we were in the midst of a field hospital, but had to leave the wounded who were later taken prisoners. From there, we turned down the mountain on the same road as Gettysburg into Maryland, Lee showing he wasn't afraid of an attack. This was the 5th day since the beginning of the battle, and I had not washed my face the whole time, and was not able to until the next morning. In the afternoon, we came to a town, and one of the men who was ahead got some fresh biscuits at the house of a woman who was a Southern sympathizer. He told me where to get some. We marched until sundown, on the mountains again, and we camped near a hotel at a watering place, South Mountain, a delightful place to camp. The next morning, I was able to wash my face, and we started down the mountain toward Hagerstown. On the road, we found ruins of wagons. Union cavalry had dashed in and burned them. Late in the afternoon, we arrived in Hagerstown and found that these same cavalrymen had been there and had had a fight with our cavalry, but both were gone now, and the town was peaceful. The wounded had been taken away, and the Union cavalry had retreated. At sundown, we turned left, marched 2 miles, and camped in an apple orchard on Antietam Creek, near the place of the battle of the year before. The Confederates call it Sharpsburg. The next morning, General McLaws rode by. His wife was a Pendleton. After the war, I traced the relationship. Across the creek was Funkstown, Maryland. In the course of the morning, we were marched across the creek and through the town and saw a Confederate battery on a hill. We formed in line of battle and advanced. At the same time, both batteries opened up. While advancing, Lieutenant Sharp was sent out on skirmish line and soon became engaged with the enemy's skirmish line. My line was in a farmyard, under a fire of skirmishers, behind stones and a fence. I saw a hen and some chickens, which made me homesick. During this time, Lieutenant Sharp was fighting bravely, but soon was ordered to retreat to the farmyard. Sharp was angry at being recalled. Then some men started firing, but we couldn't see the enemy. I was sitting with Colonel McGlashan, Captain McCalb, and others. After a while, a bullet hit Captain McCalb in the cheek, and he had to go to the rear. A little later, when I happened to look down the line, I saw a man from Thomas County killed dead. He was the only man killed in that place. We stayed there until sundown, and then were withdrawn to the same camp across the creek in the orchard, where we stayed 2 days in line of battle behind a stone wall. While I was there, I met 2 men who knew Uncle Edmund. Also, I wrote home about the Battle of Gettysburg. I opened the letter by saying, "The Lord has saved my life through another great battle."